Look, I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president until I think she was not qualified to be president. So let's start there.
We're done. It's over. First question immediately crashed. It's over. Come on. You can't help but laugh. Come on. The first question. Oh. We're doing a candlelight power outage stream while Putin is not Putin. While Biden is doing the press conference after the NATO summit, and we need to watch it because already it's not going to a great start. If I'm being blunt, because right now the whole country is watching Biden, and they're about to watch this press conference in 4 minutes, and he did a little 2-minute speech at the NATO summit, at the end of the NATO summit with Zelensky and all these other people, and he had to introduce Zelensky. So he gave a short 2-minute, 3-minute speech. It was fine. It was okay. It went well. He stumbled a tiny bit on his words, like the type of, kind of mumbling that he does, but he kept going, which is the right thing to do, because Trump mumbles and fumbles and stumbles and stuff all the time. He just never stops. When he lies twice, thrice, no matter how many times, he just never stops. Biden will like stop and like start trying to solve the Rubik's Cube as the words don't work or they just fumble out a few times, but this time he kept going. But at the end, he was meant to introduce Vladimir Zelensky, and he ended up introducing not Vladimir Zelensky. He ended up introducing somebody totally different. And let me see if I can just pick up this clip here quick, because my goodness, it is not great. It is not good. It is not fantastic. Let me play it for you.
That's what the compact says, loudly and clearly. And now I want to hand it over to the president of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. President Putin. You can beat President Putin. President Zelensky. I'm so focused on beating Putin, we got to worry about it. Anyway, Mr. President.
I'm better.
You are a hell of a lot better.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Thank you very much.
Zelensky's up there doing his best to pick up the pieces, but that hurt. That hurt. It was an accident. And, I don't even think this is necessarily indicative of a mental slipping state. I mean, it could be, but he was talking about Putin in his speech, and he mentioned him like once or twice. So it's not impossible that he just said Putin once, Putin twice, and then his mind got into it, and he said it a third time. Sometimes I'll be repeating somebody's name so many times, and I'll so many times switch to somebody else, flip. So that happens. But the problem is, with so many slip-ups from Biden, and with people in the media hyper aware, and with all of his events being like hyper focused on now for everyone looking for mistakes, to seeing if was the Democratic Party covering this up. I mean, at least Biden's inner circle. Is Biden able to campaign on the campaign trail, or even just let alone run the country? Is he all there? Is he able to present himself in public? And then he slips up like this while he has a teleprompter. And now he has to go and do a whole press conference in front of the whole country that tons of people are going to be watching. And it is the press conference to watch. And as he's doing this press conference, he's going to be being asked question after question after question after question from different directions, switching from topic to topic, not just reading off of a teleprompter. Now, again, this could have just been a genuine mistake. It has nothing to do with slippage. I could see myself making the same mistake. A lot of people could make the same mistake in public. But my goodness, it couldn't have been at a worse time. 45 minutes from, and I mean this, the biggest press conference in probably Biden's career. I mean, outside of maybe press conferences of him becoming, accepting a nomination for vice president, I don't know. This is the biggest press conference of his career, because Democrats are on the sidelines right now trying to determine if this man is the man to beat Donald Trump. Because if Democrats are for real, and these are Democrats that have withdrawn, when they say withdrawn their support, they don't mean we will not vote for Biden, just we don't want Biden to be the nominee. But with so much attention and so much focus on this, whether or not this was a genuine mistake and not a mistake, And this is the problem we're going to see with Biden going forward, is since everybody's going to be looking for this, everybody's going to be looking for mistakes. Normal fumbles that anyone would make in public, that Obama would make in public, that anyone would make in public, could also get construed this way or are going to be clipped this way. Definitely when you're dealing with, let's just say, not the most honest team on the other side of the campaign here. And it is affecting Biden's polling numbers. So if he can't show himself to be presentable for one press conference, or cannot do a speech before a press conference, definitely the press conference coming up, then how can he run a campaign against somebody who is a big threat to American democracy from the Democrats' own words? Somebody who's called for the suspension of the U.S. Constitution. Somebody who tried to intimidate the Secretary of State of Georgia to overturn the election results. Somebody made a fake slate of electors to try to confuse our electoral system to send it back to the states so he could stay president. Somebody who was looking at executive orders about using the National Guard to take command of the election system and seize voting machines. Somebody who waited and didn't act on January 6th because he wanted to punish the elites, quote unquote, who were not fighting for him in Congress to subvert the electoral system, like Vice President Mike Pence. And so if you believe that this guy who said he would never accept a result where he lost, he said that if he loses, it's rigged, call for the suspension of the U.S. Constitution, somebody who openly wants to take over institutions and bend it towards his goals that I find to be very authoritarian, not to mention the strange bedfellows that he's with. From a Democrat's perspective, it would be bad for the Supreme Court and definitely any more conservative nominations to it. It'd be bad for the future of democracy if you genuinely believe that Donald Trump does not care about democracy in the way that other people would at least give some deference to the institutions that have been built up and maintained for so long. If you believe this, you've got to choose the best candidate. You've got to choose the best candidate. And there are advantages to keeping Joe Biden. The campaign finance stuff stays simple. He has over $500 million in his war chest. You can say many things about Joe Biden. His campaign has fundraised up to this point quite well. And even around the election debate, he was still fundraising quite well. Another $30 million is one of the better pieces of news from recent days. He is somebody who would keep the incumbency advantage. That is something he would maintain. Joe Biden has beat Donald Trump before, where nobody else has, and Kamala has ran for president in the primary before, and she lost. Joe Biden won, she lost. Now you could say maybe that's the Obama factor. Joe Biden was more well known. Maybe if things were different. But that's what happened. And so since the other nominee would almost certainly be Kamala Harris, so she could keep access to $500 million she sees on the ticket, and Gavin Newsom, Gretchen Whitmer, and these others would probably not be able to, even though it would still have to be done in an open convention to buy in the people. And even Jim Clyburn has said this. At the end of the day, Joe Biden has the incumbency advantage. Joe Biden has beat Donald Trump. Joe Biden would have access for certain to the $500 million. And Joe Biden's a known factor. Like with a lot of these proposals, I remember George Clooney, he wrote an article recently talking about replacing Biden with J.B. Pritzker. And let me tell you, I think J.B. Pritzker is probably a better candidate than Joe Biden. But J.B. Pritzker also has not been filtered on the national level like someone like Joe Biden has. That's why we know everything about his son, crack cocaine, and his funny hijinks across America and the world, is because he has gone through that filtration system and they dug up everything they could use against him. They haven't done that to Gavin Newsom. They haven't done that to J.B. Pritzker. They haven't done that to these other cats. To some extent, they've done it to Kamala, but when she becomes the nominee, don't be surprised if they're looking and digging, as Donald Trump was while president, through calls with Zelensky, for example, for dirt on her family, her immediate associates, her time as DA, which is, there will be ample material that I'm sure they will try to dig into. I don't particularly think it'll be effective in trying to divert away the black vote, like many people, like I've heard some Republicans suggest, but they will certainly attempt to. So there's an amount of uncertainty. It's a question about risk. It's not that I think Joe Biden's the best candidate. It's that when you jump over to another candidate, these scandals, these flops, their ability to connect with voters on the national stage, I mean, it's uncertain. Ron DeSantis thought he was smart in trying to run for president in 2024. If he would have just waited another 4 years, maybe that would have helped his chances. Maybe that would have gotten him ahead more with Donald Trump and picking up the legacy after him. But he ran this time thinking that he could make the case that, hey, Donald Trump lost the last election. I haven't lost the election. I got this policy agenda. I delivered this stuff on the anti-trans legislation. I delivered this stuff on guns. I delivered this, that. He went to the national stage. He was uncharismatic. Trump called him a kitty diddler, and that was the end of that. And I'm not being hyperbolic. You look it up yourself. Trump was making those social media posts talking about what DeSantis was doing with young girls. You can look it up yourself. So I want the best candidate. And if Joe Biden can run a campaign and he can run a campaign good, and either like a different sleep schedule or a different campaign schedule, maybe 20-minute stops at each campaign event to try to have Biden hit more locations one after the other, and you know, leaning on surrogates to help make those campaign events longer and integrate it with local communities, trying to bring like local state delegates, local state senators, local county officials, local city officials to lean on to try to, you know, build on local connections and try to have other surrogates like Pete speak for him. There's like ways that they could try to go about this to election day while keeping Biden on an at least a somewhat good campaign pace. But that's if he can have this back and forth cleanly. Even if Joe Biden is having all of his thoughts coherently, if he cannot express them coherently to the American public, or at least in a way that makes it look like that he is competent enough to lead the country, even if it's just he's not competent enough to run a presidential campaign across the whole country. At least when I say competent, I mean like speaking competence, not like, I don't know, legislative or policy competence or whatever else. If he cannot convince people of that, then Democrats are given very little option but to go over to Kamala Harris, because I am of the belief that this election, and this is something that really did connect with me, has to be about the unfitness. It has to be about a few things, right? It has to be about a positive policy agenda from Democrats. It can't just be, oh, Trump's bad. But when it comes to Trump, it has to be about his lack of fitness for the office. And every time Joe Biden has a slip up, like we just had with the Putin and Zelensky thing, that's not talking about Trump's unfitness. It's talking about Biden's unfitness. And I mean, Trump is, the majority of Americans think Trump is also unfit to be president of the United States, mentally unfit to be president of the United States. But I mean, that's not getting covered in the same way Biden's getting covered. And maybe it would just be the focus of Donald Trump if we didn't have those stories with Joe Biden. Who knows, though? It's impossible to say. Something else on Kamala Harris could be chomped into. I mean, look at these numbers. This just recently came out. This is an ISPOS poll from the Washington Post and ABC News. This has Kamala Harris up 3 points, I think maybe just outside the margin of error, ahead of Donald Trump, while Joe Biden, I believe, was down 1 point, but that is within the margin of error. So, I mean, even with a lot of these polls, even though people are dreaming about the polling data, they're still a little all over the place. Joe Biden can win, but I gotta also say it's not a convincing argument, at least from the Biden campaign. If the argument isn't like, oh, here's our really strong case for victory, here's our really strong path to victory, here is why we think Joe Biden is the best candidate to beat Donald Trump right now in this day and age. But if it's like, oh, he can still beat Donald Trump, I mean, maybe. I think he still has a chance to beat Donald Trump. Yeah, I believe that, absolutely. But I want the odds to be as good as they can be. That has to be the priority. That has to be the priority. I mean, it's not like like Kamala Harris is in there, that there's gonna be a substantive policy difference between her and Joe Biden. In fact, I mean, Kamala, I wouldn't be surprised if at least a few of Kamala Harris's policies could be at least slightly more progressive than Joe Biden. It's kind of hard to say because she has not distinguished herself that much from Biden's agenda. So having a policy conversation is kind of almost a moot point at this time, unless you want to go look at her old record as DA or her old time before this or her 2020 campaign. But a lot has happened since then. And the main conversation should be, for understandable reasons from a Democratic strategic point, can Biden win? When's this press conference starting? It's supposed to have started 10 minutes ago. That's always a good sign. That's always a great sign. Yes, okay, finally. Let's do this.
NATO summit, and the consensus among the members was it was a great success. It was especially momentous because it represented the 75th year, the most important military defense and alliance in the world's history of the world. We should never forget that NATO grew out of the wreckage of World War II, the most destructive war in history. The idea was to create an alliance of free and democratic nations that would commit themselves to to a compact of collective defense. Standing together, they knew we'd all be safer. An attack on one would be treated as an attack on all. And it's worked because a would-be aggressor knows if they attack one of us, they'll be attacked by all of us. Sending that message is the best way to deter aggression and prevent wars in the first place. For those who thought NATO's time had passed, they got a rude awakening when Putin invaded Ukraine. Some of the oldest and deepest fears in Europe roared back to life because once again, a murderous madman was on the march. But this time, no one cowered in appeasement, especially the United States. We collected intelligence that Russia was planning to invade Ukraine months before the invasion. I directed the intelligence community to be a significant amount of intelligence be declassified so I could start building an international coalition to oppose the invasion. Then in February, some of you remember, I warned the world that the invasion was imminent. I rallied a coalition of 50 nations from Europe to Asia to help Ukraine defend itself. Many foreign policy experts thought as Putin amassed Russian forces just 100 miles north of Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, but Putin thought it was the mother home of Russia. The capital would fall in less than a week. But the Ukrainian people, backed by a coalition to help build, stopped them. Today,
I think he said it would fall to
Kyiv
Russia.
still stands, and NATO stands stronger than it has ever been.
Mother home of Russia?
During the week of this summit, several heads of states made it a point in their statements to thank the United States and to thank me personally for all that NATO has achieved. NATO is not only stronger, NATO is bigger because we led the charge to bring in Finland and Sweden into the alliance, and it makes a gigantic difference. Excuse me. Meanwhile, my predecessor has made it clear he has no commitment to NATO. He's made it clear that he would feel no obligation to honor Article 5. He's already told Putin, and I quote, "Do whatever the hell you want." In fact, the day after Putin invaded Ukraine, here's what he said. It was genius. It was wonderful. Some of you forgot that, but that's exactly what he said.
He did say it was genius. I don't remember if he said it was wonderful, but it's not at least it's, I remember the first part. I don't remember the second part, but that could just because it's been so long since the start of the invasion. But I do just want to remind you guys that that did happen. He was, Trump's defenses, he meant strategically, not in morals, at least.
But I made it clear a strong NATO is essential to American security. And I believe the obligation of Article 5 is sacred. And I would remind all Americans, Article 5 is invoked only once in NATO's long history, and that was to defend America after 9/11. I made it clear that I will not bow down to Putin. I will not walk away from Ukraine. I will keep NATO strong. That's exactly what we did, and exactly what we'll continue to do. Now, the future of American policy is up to the American people. This is much more than a political question. It's more than that. It's a national security issue. Don't reduce this to the usual testament that people talk about, issues of being a political campaign. It's far too important. It's about the world we live in for decades to come. Every American must ask herself or himself, is the world safer with NATO? Are you safer? Is your family safer? I believe the American people know.
Okay, it's a good
The
run.
answer to all those questions is yes.
He looked at the camera. He looked at
And I
America.
believe the American people understand that America is stronger because of our alliances. I believe the American consensus from Truman to Reagan to me still holds today. America cannot retreat from the world. We must lead the world. We're an indispensable nation, as Madeleine Albright wrote.
He loves that
Now
quote.
let me turn to three other key issues. Just this morning, we had a great economic report showing inflation is down. Overall prices fell last month. Core inflation is the lowest it's been in 3 years. Prices are falling for cars, appliances, and airfares. Grocery prices have fallen since the start of the year. We're going to keep working to take down corporate greed to bring those prices down further. Meanwhile, Trump's calling for a 10% tariff on everything Americans buy, including food from overseas, vegetables.
This is a good thing to hit him on. While people like protectionism is generally popular, if you put a number on what a tariff is going to be and then you tell people how that will be passed down to consumers, and you're saying all products, like you can't confuse people and say, oh, it's iron, and then you think I don't buy iron, even though you have to pay it down the line in different products that use iron. By just making it like everything, that does give Trump a lot less wiggle room and saying that's not going to affect everyday consumers.
Other necessities. And economists tell us that would cost the average American working family another $2,500 a year. It's a tax of $2,500 a year. Second, our efforts to secure the border, southern border, is working. After Trump killed the bipartisan effort to secure the border,
good, remind people of that,
Republicans and Democrats had worked on, because he thought it would benefit me and make him a loser, Republicans walked away. So I took executive action last month.
He likes calling Trump a loser. I've noticed that.
As a consequence, working with Mexico, border encounters have gone down over 50%. The current level is lower today than when Trump left office. Third, for months, the United States has been working to secure a ceasefire in Gaza, to bring the hostages home, to create a path for peace and stability in the Middle East. 6 weeks ago,
it's going good now.
I laid out a detailed plan.
Mumbled a few times at the start.
In writing.
Didn't stop, kept going.
Was endorsed by the UN Security Council.
Doing well now.
The G7. That framework is now agreed on by both Israel and Hamas. So I sent my team to the region to hammer out the details. These are difficult, complex issues. There's still gaps to close. We're making progress. The trend is positive.
Guys, he said the word complex. Old men don't do complex things. The case for Joe is building.
And I'm determined to get this deal done and bring an end to this war, which should end now. Let me conclude where I began. We're the United States of America. We are the indispensable nation.
There's nothing,
our leadership
nothing
matters.
Outside of our capacity.
Our partnerships
we
matter.
Put our mind to it.
This moment matters. We must rise to meet it. With that, I'll take your questions.
Really? He didn't do that quote. I threw that quote out because he loves that quote. I thought he was going to throw it out. He really loves that line. It's his coconut thing for America. I think he believes it, though. But you can never tell with a suit.
I've been given a list of people to call on here. Reuters, Jeff Mason.
Mr. President, your political future has hung over the NATO summit a little bit this week. Speaker Pelosi made a point of suggesting that your decision on whether to stay in the race was still open. George Clooney and a handful of lawmakers have called on you to step aside.
Smiling at George.
Reuters is reporting tonight that UAW leadership is concerned about your ability to win.
UAW just endorsed me, but go ahead.
Thank you. My question for you is, how are you incorporating these developments into your decision to stay? And separately, what concerns do you have about Vice President Harris's ability to beat Donald Trump if she were at the top of the ticket?
Look, I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president until I think she was not qualified to be president. So let's start there.
We're done. It's over. First question immediately crashed. It's over. Come on. Come on. You can't help but laugh. Come on. The first question. Oh. Oh. Oh, come on.
Number one.
You're going to keep going. And it just keeps going.
The consideration is that I think I'm the most qualified person to run for president. I beat him once, and I will beat him again. Secondly, the idea I served in the Senate a long time. The idea that senators and congressmen.
And the sad thing is that thing he just did, Trump does all the time. But the problem is the increased scrutiny on him right now because of that terrible debate performance. Even if like worst case scenario for the country, they're both actively deteriorating. Trump is out there. Do you know how many campaign stops Trump has made recently? Very few. And the Republicans are holding fire. They're basically, it's almost like the let your enemies make a mistake moment. They're letting Joe Biden fill the airwaves. Don't interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake kind of thing. And so Trump's just, he's sitting pretty, just denying his ties to Project 2525 and the rest of that. I mean, it's a lie, but whatever. But this is what's filling the airwaves. I mean, when you look at like the New York Times or any of these big publications, the top 4 or 5 stories is about this. And then there's like one that's like, hey, also like Donald Trump like lied like 20 times yesterday, but it's like whatever. Only about like a ton of national security issues.
Running for office, worry about the ticket is not unusual. And I might add, there are at least 5 presidents running or incumbent presidents who had lower numbers than I have now, later in the campaign. So there's a long way to go in this campaign. And so I'm just going to keep moving. And because, look, I got more work to do. We got more work to finish. There's so much, we've made so much progress. Think about it. Think about where we are economically relative to the rest of the world. Name me a world leader who wouldn't want to trade places with our economy. We created over 800,000
Keir Starmer especially, I'm sure. British inflation has not been great.
Jobs, 1.5 million. I mean, so things are moving. We got more to go. Working class people still need help. Corporate greed is still at large. Their prices, the corporate profits have doubled since the pandemic. They're coming down. And so I'm optimistic about where things are going.
Corporate profits have doubled since the pandemic, but they're coming down. I assume he meant prices.
Danny Kemp, AFP.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to ask you about you mixed up Presidents Zelensky and Putin earlier today. And you now have sort of your key allies, including the British Prime Minister, the President of France, the German Chancellor having to step in and make excuses for you on that. And officials here are saying off the record that your decline has become noticeable. Hasn't this now, frankly, become damaging for America's standing in the world? Thank you.
Did you see any damage to our standing by leading this conference? Have you seen a more successful conference? What do you think? And the Putin piece, I was talking about Putin, and I said, and now, at the very end, I said, here, I mean, Putin. I said, no, I'm sorry, Zelensky. And then I added 5 other names. Look, guys, the idea anybody suggests that we haven't had an incredibly successful conference. How many times did you hear
That's not the
in
question.
that conference?
Conference is
I know it
successful,
sounds too
but
self-serving, but
not the question.
other leaders, heads of state, in thanking me, saying the reason we're together is because of Biden.
You know what's crazy is the thing, again, like Trump, like anytime during debates, you ask him a question, he doesn't like the question, he'll just answer the question, like most politicians, that he wants to be asked. Sometimes just a question that's completely unrelated, he'll just jump topics. Joe takes so much time that all you can do is notice. But Trump is like going too fast. It's impossible to not notice it.
Because Biden did the following.
I mean, it's somewhat connected, but like that wasn't the question he was asked.
Look, folks, this is well, anyway, I thought it was the most successful conference I've attended in a long time.
Well, anyway.
And find me a world leader who didn't think it was. Next one. Nancy Cordes, CBS.
Thank you, Mr. President. You mentioned other instances in history where presidents have faced a challenge. But what makes this moment in history so unique is that it is not your enemies who are calling on you to reconsider your decision to stay in the race. It's your friends, supporters, people who think you've done a great job over the past 4 years. Have you spent time thinking about?
I mean, there have been reports, I know that we've heard from like Joe Scarborough and others, that like Biden was resentful about him being asked to step aside for Hillary and stuff like that. And honestly, like, I don't know how much credit I put into it. It's not impossible to imagine that, though. Like, is this really the first time that Joe Biden has been faced with this question? And from what Joe Scarborough and others have said, and I don't know how much weight I put into this, just treat it as rumor, is that Joe Biden has saw those questions to like tell him to drop out before as stymieing his attempts to run. Then Hillary ran, lost. If he did run, maybe Trump would have never been president, because to be honest, people liked Hillary less than they liked Joe at the time. And 2016, Joe certainly could have ran, I think, a campaign certainly better than the one that's being ran right now. And I think maybe that has an effect on the psyche, that he doesn't want people to kind of like knock him off course again, or that's at least his perspective from where he's standing.
What it would mean for your legacy.
Just talking about his perspective.
Which you've worked decades to build, if you stay in the race, despite the concerns that voters say they have, and you lose to someone who you yourself have argued is unfit to return to the Oval Office?
Well, look, I'm not in this for my legacy. I'm in this to complete the job I started. As you recall, understandably,
That's a good answer.
Many of you and many economists thought my initial initiatives that I put forward, can't do that, it's going to cause inflation, things are going to skyrocket, the debt's going to go up. What are you hearing now from mainstream economists? 16 economic Nobel laureates.
Look, I get like Joe Biden can make good points when he does this, like, what do you hear now? And he gets in his low voice. I don't know if his low voice is like a visual cue that people really, maybe I'm getting nitpicky now, but I don't know like if that emphasis of the point helps that much when he starts whispering answers. I don't think it's particularly bad. I just don't really know why he does it.
Mainstream economist, 16 economic Nobel laureates said I've done a hell of a job.
President, this is an election with with two candidates with a lot of interesting verbal cues.
And under my plans so far and what's going to happen in the future if I'm reelected, that things are going to get much better. Our economy is growing. I was determined when I got elected to stop the trickle-down economic theory. That if the wealthy did very well, everybody.
I like it. It's lively. I guess it's someone, I don't know. Maybe it just doesn't click with me, but I mean, yeah, it does emphasize the point. You notice the emphasization. I just don't know if just giving more oomph to the voice would be better than like whispering in the way he does, lowering his voice and like kind of, he's not completely whispering, get like half whisper. I don't know. I don't want to get too nitpicky. Plus the conference, it keeps going.
Everybody else would do well. My dad was a well-read, decent guy. I don't remember much trickling down on his kitchen table. Middle-class people and working-class people need help. And so what happened is I decided to was able to implement as president what I believed when I was a senator. And that is that the way to build this economy is from the middle out and the bottom up. That way we grow the economy. And the wealthy still do very well. They do fine. And guess what? Find me an economist, a mainstream economist who said we haven't done well. What have we not done that isn't working right now? And so we got more to do, though. We got to finish the job. And by the way,
when he says stuff like that, it sounds like he's more asking it to the press than he is the general American public. And I feel like he should be concentrating on speaking to the American public when he's like, what haven't I done that's successful? Just say the things that are successful. Because the biggest problem right now, one of the biggest problems Democrats have is not selling the agenda that they've done. Like, not selling like, hey, when child tax credit was implemented, that like helped cut child poverty in half. Or, hey, what about the Infrastructure Act, the CHIPS investment, the lowest unemployment rate for black workers, and I mean, like, we're breaking records. There's like a bunch of things that he could claim, including things that Trump claimed more successfully. I mean, Trump has even claimed current black unemployment numbers as his numbers. That's how braggadocious Trump is, that he's claiming Biden's numbers as his numbers, because I guess the Biden team just left them on the floor.
I come from the corporate state of the world. Delaware has more corporations and
He doesn't need to get into the specific numbers. He can just say like the things that like lowest black unemployment on record. He doesn't need to get into the 2.5, because once you get into the number specifics, that can, you overcomplicate it.
registered in Delaware than every other state in the nation combined. I'm not anti-corporate, but corporate profits have doubled since the pandemic, doubled. It's time things get back in order a little bit. It's time, for example, if I'm reelected, we're going to make sure that rents are kept at 5% increase in corporate rents for apartments and the like and homes are limited to 5%. We're going to make a lot of changes that I've been talking about because we're going to continue to.
It sounded like a cool policy. I wish it was clearly. It sounded like a good policy, but he didn't really. He fumbled it, and I think this is going to be confusing exactly what he's saying. Like cap 5% rent. If you care about rent prices, that sounds good, but I don't know if that really. Is Dylan's hair flowing? Oh, I got a little fan on. Just the little fumbles, making the good pitches bad, or not bad, but like not giving it the oomph it needs to give the jolt back into the campaign.
Grow this economy. And by the way, I know, remember how I got so roundly criticized for being so pro-union, not labor, union. Well, guess what? I've been the most pro-union labor president in history. Not a joke. And guess what? We had the Treasury Department do a study. When unions do better, everybody does better. Everybody does better.
Like, was that appealing? Like, it gave emphasis. I paid attention. Everybody in there. It's kind of hard not to pay attention when he goes, everybody does better. You know, it's kind of hard not to. But I mean, and like his point was good. I just don't know if it's appealing.
We talk about
a good point to emphasize, though. This is the type of stuff he should be hitting on. Unions are overwhelmingly popular in the United States.
About how, for example, remember when we talked about getting the computer chip industry back in the United States? Used to be 40% of the industry. We invented the chip. 40% of the industry was in the United States. And former presidents decided that the best way to do it is find the cheapest labor in the world, send the product over there, and import what the product was. And so what did I do? I was told not to go over to Europe, to Asia, including Europe, but Asia. And I remember going to South Korea, convincing them to invest.
Like, what was that? Like Europe, Asia, including, like he could have just said Europe and Asia. But again, like in the grand scheme of things, those little things aren't important, but they're just going to get put under a microscope under this environment.
$1 billion in the United States to build computer chip factories. And I asked why when they finally decided to do it. And the answer was because you have the safest economy in the world and you have the best workers in the world. So the whole idea here is we've invested, there's over $50 billion in investment in computer chip manufacturing just coming into being. None of you thought that would happen. None of you thought that would happen. But it's happening. It's happening. And it's going to grow economies. All through, and by the way, red states and blue states.
Sorry, I just read something on Twitter about Zelensky, the Zelensky introduction. This is from, one second. This is from an ABC News investigations reporter. A House Dem tells me in reaction to Biden mixing up Putin and Zelensky's name. This is the greatest introduction of all time. It would be like introducing Winston Churchill and saying, ladies and gentlemen, Hitler. Oh.
Matter of fact, there's as much in red states as blue states. I've made no distinction. So my generic point is that the idea that we can't continue to build and grow the economy, make it fairer. Like I said.
Dylan, who would you prefer as the nominee since you've got nothing but criticism for Biden?
I don't got nothing but criticism for Biden. Like I said, there's like certain things he's focusing on. Like Biden always having like pro-union messaging and that being a dominant theme of his campaign. I think that helps him getting endorsements like UAW. I think that's been reflected in his NLRB, and I think that that's something that's going to help him on the campaign trail. He's the incumbent. There's advantages to Joe Biden being the nominee of the president. He's beat Donald Trump before. There is advantages, but like I just that gaffe following with this press conference. I'm going to be a little extra critical maybe because it's a big moment, but I'm trying not to be like, I don't want to hyper focus to the point of blowing things out of proportion. And if I'm doing that a little bit, I'm sorry, but I'm just trying to be honest, frank. As for who would I want to be the nominee, if I could magically put somebody in there, I don't know, like, if I had to roll the dice on someone new, maybe Sherrod Brown or J.B. Pritzker, right? But realistically, Kamala Harris would probably have to be the nominee. To the access to campaign funds, she has at least more national status, and so she's less of an unknown when it comes to like possible scandals that could like erupt out of nowhere. Whereby, you know, we need somebody who's not gonna just have a crazy scandal come out of nowhere because they've never been filtered through a national level campaign before, like she did when she ran in the Democratic primary, even if not to the level Joe Biden's gone through. There is some polls that have shown her performing well against Trump, at least well enough against Trump to beat him potentially, even though it's close to the margin of error. So I think it would probably have to be Kamala, even though I don't necessarily think she would be the best candidate to beat Trump out of all the people around the country. But it's usually not a clear path from imperfect candidate to perfect candidate. That's not usually how these shuffles of the reshuffling of the deck goes. Not saying either Sherrod Brown or J.B. Pritzker are a perfect candidate, just that I think they fulfill the role they would need to fulfill in this moment.
Point. When the middle class does well, that's when the whole economy grows. The poor have a shot, the wealthy do well, but the wealthy got to start paying their taxes.
As a follow-up, sir, you mentioned that your Vice President Kamala Harris would be ready to serve on day one. Can you elaborate on that? What is it about her attributes and her accomplishments over the last 4 years that make her ready to serve on day one?
This is important. This is an important moment for Biden. This is an important moment for Biden because people are going to be voting for Joe Biden. If they vote for Joe Biden, which over Trump they should, at least my opinion, okay, as a biased libtard, they're going to be thinking about, okay, if Joe Biden can't be president after 2-3 years, I mean, not even just from, you know, being too old, but, you know, getting shot, hurt, any other things that could happen with you being president of the United States. But especially under the current context, why would Kamala, like, the discussion of her as president is going to come up a lot more. And I see Republicans talking about it more and more and more and preparing for that scenario. So now more than ever, the Biden campaign has to sell Kamala Harris's accomplishments in office, which, I mean, they haven't done a lot of, or certainly enough of, for her to pick up the torch at this moment, with at least a somewhat positive head start. There's a lot of catch-up work to do, is what I mean, with introducing her to the general public and what she's actually done. Because you ask most Americans what Kamala Harris done in office, they have no clue. Most people know more about Michelle Obama's health initiative, her crusade jihad against the fat kids, than Kamala Harris's achievement while in office. Not saying she hasn't done anything. She represented the United States at the Ukraine Peace Summit, for example, recently. But it's just most Americans have no clue.
Day one, if necessary.
First of all, the way she's handled the issue of freedom of women's bodies to have control over their bodies. Secondly, her ability to handle.
Hey, thank you so much, Alex Brown, for becoming a YouTube member. I appreciate that, buddy. Thank you, thank you. Oh wait, no, Sonky, FH, he actually gifted you a membership. That was nice of him. Thank you.
Almost any issue on the board. This was a hell of a prosecutor. She was a first-rate person, and in the Senate, she was really good. I wouldn't have picked her unless I thought she was qualified to be president. From the very beginning, I made no bones about that. She is qualified to be president. That's why I picked her.
Didn't really talk much about her accomplishments, just that she was good, but I mean, went fine enough.
Schwartz, Financial Times.
Thank you, Mr. President. Presidency is the most straining job in the world, and it's 24/7. How can you say you'll be up for that next year, in 2 years, in 4 years, given the limits you've acknowledged that you have today?
The limits I've acknowledged I have?
There's been reporting that you've acknowledged that you need to go to bed earlier and your evening around 8.
That's not true. Look, what I said was, instead of my every day starting at 7 and going to bed at midnight, it'd be smarter for me to pace myself a little more. And I said, for example, the 8, 7, 6 stuff, instead of starting a fundraiser at 9 o'clock, start at 8 o'clock. People get to go home by 10 o'clock. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about, and if you looked at my schedule since I
it was not reported like that. I don't know which is true. Obviously this would be better for Biden, but it might have been misreported. I mean, like, the media have been like sharks in water over the story, trying to, like, a lot of stories have gotten blown up, and the White House has been responding to story after story, denying in a frenzy. No clue what's real and what's not here.
That stupid mistake of in the campaign, in the debate. I mean, my schedule has been full bore. I've done, where's Trump been? Riding around in his golf cart, filling out his scorecard before he hits the ball? I mean, look.
Every time Joe Biden gets mean about Donald Trump, he does really well. You've got the morals of the alley cat. What's he doing? Well, because Biden's been doing a lot of campaign stops actually recently, a lot of public appearances. Trump, again, like I said, Trump is staying low. I'm telling you, the Republicans are basically let Biden be the national news story for the next month. This is great for us. They're holding fire. They are holding fire. I'm not kidding. Not all of them, obviously, not all the internet goons or whatever, but they are holding fire to some extent. So, I mean, again, when he gets mean though, like, I don't know, man. Maybe they just need to like give Biden like a list of insults, like old-timey folksy insults to throw at Trump. And if he does that for half the debate, makes the other half about positive policy agenda items that they have accomplished, like 30% of what, 50% old-timey insults, 30% what they have gotten done, 20% what they want to get done.
He's done virtually nothing. And I don't know how many, don't hold me to it, roughly 20 major events. Someone with thousands of people showing up. And so I just think it's better. I always have an inclination, whether I was playing sports or doing politics, just to keep going, not stop. I just got to just pace myself a little more. Pace myself. In the next debate, I'm not going to be traveling. And
honestly, I don't know how that's going to be read. Will people respond positively to Biden saying, yeah, you know, I wake up at 8 a.m. instead of 7 a.m., or we shut down our meetings at 9 p.m. instead of 10 p.m. so people can get home by 10 p.m.? Him openly saying I have to pace myself a little bit more. This is like a moment of like honesty. If his version of the report is true, him having to say that period though is not usually something you hear from a presidential candidate for the United States. Certainly one who's trying to deal with the unfit for office label. But maybe the perspective is like, hey, we need to give the American people an idea of how this old man can be president old man. And the only way to do that is to show them that there is a plan to, you know, lean into strengths, not like deal with weaknesses, allow him to get proper rest, which is like an uncomfortable conversation to have. But I wonder if that like frank honesty will play well. I mean, if he's polling at like a 75 or like 78% like not fitness level, I guess it's not really anywhere lower he can go from there. I think ABC had a poll at him like 85% too old. So it's not like he's gonna get, oh, it's 89%, now it's over, right? The people believe he's old. So I mean, I guess it can't get any worse by just being like, yeah, I'm old. Maybe the transparency will help. I don't know.
there's 15 times.
I think it's the right way to go, though. If I had to make the call, I would say having Biden go out in like a hot topic get up and like coming out in Heelys or something is not gonna work. And just being like, yeah, I'm an old man, but I can still be president is a wiser way to walk forward if you're working forward with Joe.
Time zones a week before. Anyway, that's what it was about. That's what it was about. And by the way, even with that, I love my staff, but they add things all the time. At the very end, I'm catching hell from my wife for that. Anyway.
Man, brutal honesty coming out right now. Throwing the staff under the bus.
Zeke Miller, Associated Press.
Thank you, Mr. President. Two questions for you. First, on the NATO summit, President Zelensky, in your meeting with him, he pressed you to lift your limitations on the Ukrainian use of American weapons, saying that, in his public remarks afterwards, saying that Ukraine cannot win the war unless those limitations are lifted. Are you reconsidering your position on that? And then secondly, following up on Felicia's question there.
It's good. John Kirby was pressed about this recently. Biden's getting pressed about it at the big moment on big television. This is good. It's good that I gotta give the press scrum. Who was this? What channel was this? 1 second.
I'm sorry. Zeke Miller, Associated Press.
Associated Press. AP. I know good AP reporters. Thank you, AP.
Thank you, Mr. President. Two questions for you. First, on the NATO summit, President Zelensky, in your meeting with him, he pressed you to lift your limitations on the Ukrainian use of American weapons, saying that, in his public remarks afterwards, saying that Ukraine cannot win the war unless those limitations are lifted. Are you reconsidering your position on that? And then secondly, following up on Felicia's question there, leaders of your own party have said that they're not worried about that debate. They're worried about the next bad night and the bad night after that. How can you reassure the American people that you are up to the task and that there won't be more bad nights at a debate stage or somewhere else?
They're doing 2 questions at a time. I mean, this is a real press scrum. 2 questions at a time isn't easy. I mean, I'll usually have to ask the second question again when I get asked 2 questions at a time. And I'm 23, man. I got.
First thing about Zelensky asking for the ability to strike deep into Russia. We've allowed Zelensky to use American weapons in the near term, in the near or abroad, into Russia. Whether or not he should be attacked. For example, should Zelensky, he's not. If he had the capacity to strike Moscow, strike the Kremlin, would that make sense? It wouldn't. The question is, what's the best use of the weaponry he has, the weaponry we were getting to him? I've gotten him more long-range capacity, as well as defensive capacity.
Wait, okay, I'm sorry, but ATACMS, cluster munitions hitting Russian air bases 150 kilometers away from the border that are bombing Ukrainian children's hospitals seems like a good use of American weapons, right? If attacking the troops over the border from Volchansk was a good use of American weapons for its attack on Ukraine, and they were using the protections, the political protections provided by the restrictions placed by the West on these Western weapons not being allowed on Russia, and it was wrong to allow that when they were exploiting that to attack Volchansk, I think it would also make sense to also say it makes sense to strike the targets that are exploiting that protection, to strike certainly children's hospitals or bombing Ukrainian electrical infrastructure or bombing any other of the hospitals that they've bombed. Russia's bombed a lot of hospitals, or the bombing of any other number of important Ukrainian military targets for just winning the war. I mean, they're constantly bombing Ukraine from these air bases. I just don't think that this logically extends. I don't think John Kirby made a good point, and that's why he dodged the questions on justification. And this is honestly, that there's no real good way to justify this from like a public diplomacy perspective outside of like just saying escalation, which after blurring the line, since we've already crossed the border, it's hard to argue that if striking over the border into Russia, in Kursk and in Belgorod and these regions was allowed and it didn't start World War III, it's hard to imagine that going like 50 miles further and hitting an airbase that bombed a hospital is going to cause World War III. The West has more levers for escalation than Russia does when it comes to total capacity that could be attributed to the war. Russia's game plan or their path to victory is tuning up their escalation enough to beat the Ukrainians while not doing so much that it causes the West to spur into action, like what happened after the Volchansk offensive and the approval from the Biden administration to strike across the border. And like a way to get around this would be to address bombing a children's hospital as an escalation, and you respond to those escalations. Okay, whatever. I'm becoming Joe Biden right now. I'm rambling, but it's an important issue to me. Doesn't make any logical sense to me, and so it's going to be hard for Joe Biden to defend it.
And so our military is working. I'm following the advice of my commander-in-chief, the chief of staff of the military, as well as the Secretary of Defense and our intelligence people. And we're making a day-to-day basis on what they should and shouldn't go, how far they should go in. That's a logical thing to do. Second question related to...
Wait, but again, bombing the air bases, and not only just for the striking of the civilian infrastructure. The reason my power's out right now, right, and I have candles lighting on my stream, and I'm on a generator, is because the Russians keep striking the electrical infrastructure, and they can't keep power on 24/7. So we got like 12 hours of blackout time going into the winter, right? Is that not a clear policy goal, is to stop those strikes on that electrical infrastructure, make it so Russia has to pull back further their air force, make it more difficult? I mean, it's not a good, I don't think it was a good answer.
Bad nights, sir. How can you reassure the American people that you won't have more bad nights, whether they be on a debate stage or on some matter of foreign policy?
Well, I tell you what, the best way to assure them is the way I assure myself. And that is, am I getting the job done? Am I getting the job done? Can you name me somebody who's gotten more major piece of legislation passed in 3.5 years? Created 2,000 jobs just last week. So if I slow down, I can't get the job done. That's a sign that I shouldn't be doing it. But there's no indication of that yet. None. Who I got here? Merrick, Pulaski Radio.
Thank you, Mr. President. How are you?
I'm well.
The elections in the US have consequences around the world. You have pretty high standing in Europe. I just asked President Macron about you, and he said we are happy to have him as the President of the United States. But there is a concern. Many people in Poland and across Europe are worried that the former president may win the election. And there's a lot of concern that Donald Trump may weaken NATO.
That's correct.
Stop supporting Ukraine or push Ukraine to give up territories to Russia.
They're correct.
And yourself was warning just 2 minutes ago about it. So my question is, do you think that Europe will be left on its own if Donald Trump wins the election? And what's your advice to European leaders to prepare for possible US disengagement?
Well, look,
Dreary question.
I think, how can I say this without sounding too self-serving? I'm not having any of my European allies come up to me and say, Joe, don't run. What I hear them say is, you've got to win. You can't let this guy come forward. It'd be a disaster. It'd be a disaster.
He's probably not wrong. I honestly believe it. I'm not one to take a suit at face value, but I would not be surprised to have a European leader be that candid with him.
I mean, I think he said in one of his rallies, don't hold me to this, recently, where NATO, I just learned about NATO.
I mean, like if Trump's like the advisors around him are talking about making like a 2-tier system of NATO. Like there's gonna be like platinum NATO, and then there's gonna be bronze NATO for the people who aren't meeting the 2% threshold, not getting Article 5 protections, so, which would mean literally whittling down the most essential part of NATO, Article 5, whittling down collective defense, whittling down the main thing that gives NATO a purpose in the first place. It's like, this is something that would be concerning, especially to nation states like Estonia, Latvia, or Lithuania.
Or something to that effect. Foreign policy has never been his strong point. And he seems to have an affinity to people who are authoritarian. That worries, as I tell you, Poland, that worries Europe. That worries Poland. And nobody, including the people of Poland, think that if he wins in...
Can I just say, like, Twitch chat is pretty cringe, okay? Site chat can be cringe sometimes. YouTube chat is either glorious or completely confusing. For example, like, I feel like I just made a cogent point about, you know, Trump's NATO policies and disagreeing with it. And now I'm reading these messages in chat, and it's, yes, make fun of Trump, ha, accurate and great point. It wasn't, I'm not making fun of him. It's not even a joke. It was just a point about NATO. I think for a lot of people, when they watch these debates, and I kind of pour into it too, because it is important and you should cover it. But when you watch these things, I really wish that the commentary was less about performance, and I'm at fault here too. I'm openly admitting that, and it was more about substance. Because if there was more substance-centered conversations here, I think it'd be better for informing the general public, which is a priority of mine, obviously, because I would want people to know what is true and what is not true, what they heard. But I also think it would have, I really think it would have, I honestly think Donald Trump, if he had to deal with immediate fact-checking in that last debate, it would have been a wash. The debate would have been a wash. I genuinely believe that. But he hasn't had to deal with that in the live debate before. He hasn't had to deal with that. And that's not the debate culture we have, and that's not how it was set up. And so we got to deal with the circumstances as they are. But like, what I'm talking about here is not joking or whatever. It's about the security and future of millions and millions and millions of people. It's a valid concern.
That worries, as I tell you, Poland, that worries Europe. That worries Poland. And nobody, including the people of Poland, think that if he wins in Ukraine, he's going to stop in Ukraine, that that's going to be the end of it. And so what I can say is, I think I'm the best qualified person to do the job, to make sure that Ukraine does not fall, that Ukraine succeeds, that the European alliance stays strong.
Dylan, you misunderstood my comment? Okay. I believe you. I'm in a forgiveful mood. I believe in humanity. And that's why Joe will now recover and he will go Sandman mode. And the next half of this is going to be all the reporters saying, Joe Biden, you know what? You are now king. Let's watch.
I recall, no one was talking about Finland joining NATO. I remember talking to Putin right after we got elected in Geneva. And he was talking about what we should do. We couldn't be in Eastern Europe, et cetera. And I said, you're looking for the Finlandization of Ukraine. I said, you're going to get the NATOization of Finland. And about 4 weeks later, I got a call. No, that's not true. Probably 5 months later, from the president of Finland, could he come and see me? In my office. I invited him to the Oval Office. We sat down and talked. He said he wanted to join NATO. Could I help? And I did. It wasn't automatic. And then I got a call from the Swedes. I beg your pardon? And so Finland.
What was that?
Joined NATO. 800-mile border is a significant, and they were already allies, but they weren't part of NATO. And you heard, I think you heard, maybe, I can't recall whether he said a public in our closed meeting, but he wouldn't mind it being repeated. He said,
hey, Alec,
we decided in Finland, the people of Finland decided they had to be part of NATO. It was in our interest because of the joint ability to be together, to dissuade any attack on Finland. And the same thing with Sweden. It took a lot of selling to some folks, particularly in Turkey and other places, to agree to the expansion. But it expanded. And we're a hell of a lot stronger because of it. We're more secure because of it. And by the way, I was able to get 50 other nations, 50, to support Ukraine. 50. We were able to bring about a coalition of Europe and Asia, Japan and South Korea. I just we talked about AUKUS, and we talked about the relationship between Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, the United States. We're making the world safer and stronger because we have to deal with the new arrangement that exists in the world. The Cold War is over. The post-war era is over. What is going to replace it? And I respectfully suggest I have a pretty good idea what that should be. I've convinced a lot of people to follow it, and we're just going to get stronger. David Sanger. Where's that?
Thank you, Mr. President.
Be nice, David.
Mr. President, the NATO declaration that was issued yesterday was very notable because it described China as a decisive enabler of the war in Ukraine for its provision of critical goods to the Russians. That's part of a broader partnership that seems to have cemented in place in the past 2 or 3 years. I think one that you were a little bit doubtful of when we asked you about it some time ago. So I'd be interested to know whether you have a strategy now of trying to interrupt the partnership between China and Russia, and whether or not in a second term you would pursue that, if you could describe that strategy to us. And along the way, could you also tell us whether you think, just to follow up on Felicia's question, that if you were in a room with Vladimir Putin again, the way you were 3 years ago, or with President Xi, that a few years from now you will be able to go negotiate with them, handle them one-on-one?
Well, the first part of the question is, we discussed and I raised in the NATO summit, and others raised, the future of China's involvement, what they're going to do, what they're doing with Russia in terms of accommodating, facilitating. They're getting access to additional. They're not supplying weapons themselves. They're supplying mechanisms for them to be able to get weapons. And China's position is basically, and I've spent more time with Xi Jinping than any world leader has.
CNC machines.
Over 90 hours since being vice president all the way through, for real. And by the way, I handed all my notes. But my point is that Xi believes that China is a large enough market that they can entice any country, including European countries, to invest there in return for commitments from Europe to do A, B, C, or D, or not to do certain things. What's happened is we had a long discussion about what we cannot, we have to make clear China has to understand that if they are supplying Russia with information and capacity, along with working with North Korea and others to help Russia in armament, that they're not going to benefit economically as a consequence of that by getting the kind of investment they're looking for. And so, for example, we're in a situation where, and we've reestablished direct contact with China after that, remember the balloon, quote unquote, going down, and all of a sudden things came to an end? Well, we set up a new mechanism. There's a direct line between Xi and me, and our military has direct access to one another, and they contact one another when we have problems. The issue is that we have to make sure.
This is one of his most detailed questions, though. He may have fumbled a little bit in the middle, but this is probably one of his more detailed answers.
That Xi understands there's a price to pay for undercutting both the Pacific Basin as well as Europe, and it relates to Russia and dealing with Ukraine. And so we, for example, if you want to invest in China, as you know this area really well. Want to invest in China,
State
you have to have a
Department
51%.
transfer number 493629.
Thank you. State Department transfer number. Ah, okay. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. The payment's finally coming in. Shilling pays.
We, for example, if you want to invest in China, as you know this area really well. Want to invest in China, you have to have a 51% Chinese owner. You have to make sure that you do by their rules, and you don't have the authority, and you have to provide all access to all the data and information you have. There was a while there, as you recall, the last administration and other administrations, where the access to that market was enticing enough to get companies to come in because they had access to over 1 billion people in a market, not 1 billion, but a lot of people in the market. And so they were doing it. But that got curtailed when we started saying we're going to play by the same rules. For example, the idea they don't abide by the international rules related to subsidizing products by the government funding. So guess what? They're not going to be able to export their electric vehicles to the United States without a significant tariff. Others are doing the same thing around the world. But it is a concern. It is a concern that you have both China, North Korea, Russia, Iran, countries that are not necessarily coordinated in the past, looking to figure out how they can have impact.
Interrupt that impact?
Yes, I do, but I'm not prepared to talk about the detail of it in public. And I think you'll see that some of our European friends are going to be curtailing their investment in Russia. In China, as long as China continues to have this indirect help to Russia in terms of being able to help their economy as well as help them in as a consequence that their ability to fight in Ukraine. The other thing that we talked a lot about is that, and I raised it, and I didn't hear any. I can't swear that everyone agreed because not everyone got to talk about it, but we need a new industrial policy in the West. For example, we talked about how both the EU as well as NATO has to be able to begin to build their own munition capacity.
True.
Has to be able to generate their own capacity to provide for weapons and the ability to, it came as a surprise to some of us.
The problem is he's near the end and he knows what he wants to say. He's already finished the thought in his mind. I think they got to invest in the capacity, but then he just stops. He could have just finished it and then he starts a new sentence because he started a new thought. It's almost like his mind is, Muhammad Ali in his last fights, I can see him slightly reacting to punches, but he just can't get out of the way in time. Mentally he's all there in boxing. You see the punches coming, you know what moves you got to do, but your body just can't move. And in this way, and right now it feels like it's like that before his mouth, where you can see he's headed towards the end of that sentence and then he just jumps to a new one.
We had fallen behind in the West in terms of the ability to construct new material, new weaponry, new everything from vehicles to weapon systems. And so one of the things that came out of this was we're going to be meeting again with a number of my colleagues, my European colleagues, is what do we do to increase the capacity of the West, particularly in Europe,
Is this live? Yes.
and Japan, to be able to generate kind of ability to produce their own weapon systems. Not just for themselves, but to be able to generate that. It's the same, it's what Russia's trying to figure out, that they went to China and they didn't get the weapons, but then they went to North Korea. But we're going to be in a position where the West is going to become the industrial base for it to be able to, the ability to have all the defensive weapons that we need. That was a discussion as well.
Mr. President, I'm not sure you answered on whether you would be ready to go deal with Putin and Xi 2 or 3 years from now.
I'm ready to deal with them now and 3 years from now. Look, like I said, I'm dealing with Xi right now and direct contact with him. I have no good reason to talk to Putin right now. There's not much that he is prepared to do in terms of accommodating any change in his behavior. But there isn't any world leader I'm not prepared to deal with. But I understand the generic point is Putin ready to talk? I'm not ready to talk to Putin unless Putin's ready to change his behavior. And the idea, look, Putin's got a problem.
He's got a lot of problems.
First of all, in this war that he is supposedly have won, and by the way, I think, don't hold me to the exact number, but I think that Russia had 17.3% of Ukraine that they've conquered. Now it's 17.4. I mean, in terms of percentage of territory. They've not been very successful.
Not far off.
They've caused horrible damage, loss of life, but they've also lost over 350,000 troops, military, killed or wounded. They have over 1 million people, particularly young people with technical capability, leaving Russia because they see no future there.
This is true.
They've got a problem. But what they do have control of is they are very good at controlling and running the public outcry that relates to how they use mechanisms to communicate with people. They lie like hell to the constituencies. They lie like hell about what's going on. And so the idea that we're going to be able to fundamentally change Russia in the near term is not likely. But one thing for certain, if we allow Russia to succeed in Ukraine, they're not stopping in Ukraine. I recommend, I know you know this because you've written about it.
He's answering this pretty well.
Read Putin's speech after they moved in, what it was all about.
True. True.
Kyiv.
Go back and read his first speech.
It wasn't about just...
That is true. Go
anyway, read what his objective is. And anyway, but so I think that...
You gotta stop ending things randomly with anyway or whatever, or stuff like that. It just... Like, his answer was perfectly cogent, and that he threw that at the end. I do that too sometimes, so this is also a self-critique.
I'm prepared to talk to any leader who wants to talk, including if Putin called me and wanted to talk. Last time I talked to Putin was trying to get him to work on an arms control agreement related to nuclear weapons in space. That didn't go very far. So my point is, I'm prepared to talk to anybody, but I don't see any inclination. There is an inclination on the part of the Chinese to keep in contact with me because they're not sure where this all goes. And look what's happened in Asia. We have strengthened the Asian Pacific area more than anybody else has. We just put together with, today I brought on, I asked our NATO allies that we bring on the group from the South Pacific, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Australia. I already mentioned Australia. And I met twice now, I think, with
did
the
he?
14
I don't think he did.
leaders of the Pacific Island nations. And we've slowed down what's going on there. We've slowed down China's reach.
I missed it. I'm the old man.
But there's a lot of work to do. This is a moving target, and I don't take it lightly. Sam from NPR.
Hey, well, I got your all attention. All you guys on YouTube, Twitch chat, site chat. I'm probably releasing a video this weekend on my main channel, Dylan Burns TV. So if you guys want to go over there, subscribe, hit the notification bell. It's going to be original footage of a BMP fire mission in the Sybernitsky Forest in the Luhansk region, the 2% of it that's still unoccupied. And I'm going to be releasing another documentary shortly after that. I got to promote it more on this channel because if you look up Dylan Burns TV, my main channel, you have to like scroll down like 20 different videos till you actually get to my main channel because this one always comes up first. And I've been working on these projects for a bit, so hope you guys like it. Oh, also, you can subscribe and help us produce more of this content at DylanBurns.tv, DylanBurns.tv. That is our website, DylanBurns.tv. All the money, all the donations goes towards making on-the-ground freelance war journalism here in Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. President. Asma Khalid with NPR. I have two questions. Earlier, you spoke about the ceasefire plan between Israel and Hamas. We're now looking at 10 months of war, and I'm curious if there's anything that you feel personally you wish you would have done differently over the course of the war. And then secondly, if I may, I wanted to ask you about your presidential campaign. I remember covering your campaign in 2020, and there was a moment where you referred to yourself as a, quote, bridge candidacy, a transition to a younger generation of leaders. I want to understand what changed.
Two things.
Ooh, saying that he's not doing that role right now when he should. I think that's the point. Or at least that's the end point she's trying to get at. But he did say that, and he did mean it. At least that was his response to being like an older candidate at the time. But I think he probably still thought he would do 2 terms.
So let's go back to when you talked about would I have changed anything that's happening with Israel and the Palestinians and the Palestinian movement, the answer is, as you recall, from the very beginning, I went to Israel, but I also got immediate contact with al-Sisi in Egypt. I met with the King of Jordan. I met with most of the Arab leaders to try to get a consensus going.
So every journalist gets a double question, which is good, by the way. This is like, for like a presser, considering what he is under public scrutiny for, I like that they're doing this environment from a press perspective, which I'm a journalist first.
So what had to be done to deal with getting more aid and food and medicine into the Gaza Strip? And we pushed it really hard. And Israel occasionally was less than cooperative, number one. The Israeli War Cabinet, I've been dealing with Israel since Golda Meir. I've saw some of the reporters around here cover me all the time have heard me say this. The first time I met with Golda Meir, I sat across from her at her desk, and her assistant was Rabin sitting next to me. That's how far back I go. I know Israel well.
Yeah, people are aware you're old, Joe. I don't know if this is what we should be emphasizing right now. I mean, like, quips about it is okay, but stories about it is just reminding people. I mean, pitch it as experience on the issue, I guess, is what he's doing.
And I support Israel. But this war cabinet is one of the most conservative war cabinets in the history of Israel. And there's no ultimate answer other than a two-state solution here. And so what was able to be done in terms of the plan I put together was it would be a process for a two-state solution. And we get the Arab nations to, particularly from Egypt all the way to Saudi Arabia, to be in a position where they would cooperate in the transition so that they could keep the peace in Gaza without Israeli forces staying in Gaza. The question has been from the beginning, what's the day after in Gaza? And the day after in Gaza has to be, the end of the day after has to be no occupation by Israel on the Gaza Strip, as well as the ability for us to get in and out as rapidly as you can, all that's needed there. I've been disappointed that some of the things that I put forward have not succeeded as well, like the port we attached from Cyprus. I was hopeful that would be more successful.
Yeah, it was not very successful at all.
That's why when I went to Israel immediately after the massacres that occurred at the hands of Hamas, the one thing I said to the Israelis, and I met with the war cabinet and with Bibi, don't make the same mistake America made after bin Laden. There's no need to occupy anywhere. Go after the people who did the job. You may recall, I still get criticized for it, but I was totally opposed to the occupation and trying to unite Afghanistan. Once we got bin Laden, we should have moved on, because it was not no one's ever going to unite that country. I've been over every inch of that, not every inch, the entirety from the poppy fields all the way to the north. I said, don't make the same mistake we made. Don't think that's what you should be doing, is doubling down. We'll help you find the bad guys, Sinwar and company. And all this criticism about I wouldn't provide when the weapons they needed. I'm not providing them 2,000-pound bombs. They cannot be used in Gaza or any populated area without causing great human tragedy and damage. But remember what happened when you had the attack on Israel with rockets and ballistic missiles. I was able to unite the Arab nations as well as Europe, and nothing happened. Nothing got hurt.
Iranian attack on Israel.
An incredible lesson to what was going on from the Middle East. So there's a lot of things, in retrospect, I wish
The idea of Joe Biden hanging on the side of a helicopter flying above the poppy fields of Afghanistan is a strange image in my head.
Had been able to convince the Israelis to do. But the bottom line is we have a chance now. It's time to end this war. Doesn't mean walk away from going after Sinwar and Hamas. And if you notice, you know better than most, there is a growing dissatisfaction on the West Bank from the Palestinians about Hamas. Hamas is not popular now. And so there's a lot of moving parts. I just have to.
Gaza, I mean, like, they're not particularly super popular in the West Bank either, but I don't know if he meant Gaza or the West Bank. Either way, I mean, I don't think most Americans will be able to make the difference.
To make sure that we get as much,
not to be mean, I'm just that I don't think that most people are going to get stuck up on it,
done as we can toward a ceasefire, and get those. And by the way, look at the numbers in Israel. I mean, my numbers are better in Israel than they are here. But then again, they're better than a lot of other people here too. But anyway.
Bridge candidacy in 2020, you referred to yourself as being a bridge candidate for a younger, fresher generation of Democratic leaders, and I wanted to know what changed.
What changed was
nothing changed.
Gravity of the situation I inherited.
He shouldn't have said that that's changed. He should have said it hasn't changed. The torch will still be handed over, but the situation is grave and we need steady leadership. Like, he shouldn't say that it's changed and that he's no, because then it sounds like he's like an old man clinging to power. I don't think that's what he's trying to get across, but that's what it could be interpreted as.
In terms of the economy, our foreign policy, and domestic division. And I think
finishing the job angle is the perfect one. Is the perfect thing to aim towards. I mean, I think that was the best way to pitch it. You know, if you're working on building a house and you're going to pass over the keys to the construction company, you finish the last house before you move on. You don't half build it and say, okay, pick up the job from here. You know, you finish the job.
Won't put words in anybody's mouth. Most presidential historians give me credit for having accomplished more than most any president since Johnson and maybe before that to get major pieces of legislation passed. And what I realized was my long time in the Senate had equipped me to have the wisdom to know how to deal with the Congress, to get things done. We got more major legislation passed that no one thought would happen. And I want to finish it, to get that finished. If tomorrow, if we had a circumstance where there was a lineup and I hadn't inherited what I did and we just moved things along, anyway, it's going to change.
Last question.
He was doing fine until whatever. Like, I don't understand why it ends with anyway. Like, again, like, just finish the thought. It was perfect all up to that point.
Haley Bull, Scripps. Or no, Josh Weingrove, I'm sorry, was the next one. I'll do 2 more questions.
Thank you, Mr. President. Many of your colleagues, Democrats on the Hill, are watching tonight as they assess what they want to say about your candidacy. I'm wondering how you're thinking of this right now. It seems like your answer is clear, but they're watching how things go tonight, tomorrow in Michigan, next week in Texas and Nevada. Are you thinking that way about how the next week or 2 goes would inform your...
Am I using that way, you said?
Are you thinking that way about how the next 2 weeks go? Will that affect your decision, or are you fully determined on running in November as the party's nominee?
He has to say fully determined, even if he's considering it, because if he says, I don't know, and then he ends up going through, then like that, if he's uncertain about him being president, then if he can't be his own advocate, then who can be his advocate? You have to be your own advocate. If Trump started saying like, I don't know if my presidency was the greatest, his whole campaign would fall apart because there's no way. He has to be his own advocate. Like, how else could he possibly answer that question? I'm
determined on running, but I think it's important that I allay fears by let them see me out there. Let me see them out. You know, for the longest time it was, you know, Biden's not prepared to sit with us unscripted. Biden's not prepared to, anyway. And so what I'm doing is, and I've been doing, I think we've done over 20 major events from Wisconsin to...
I think that was the first well-placed anyway of the whole presser.
North Carolina, to demonstrate...
Never mind, another...
That...
This is like he's the Uno reverse card. He just throws it out there.
I'm going out in the areas where we think we can win, where we can persuade people to move our way, or people are already there. And here, look, the other thing is, We have the most extensive campaign organization of anybody's had in a long, long time.
Double anyway tab.
We have well over 1,000 volunteers knocking on doors, making phone calls, making tens of thousands of phone calls. We have headquarters. I forget exactly how many. I want to say
Wait, 1,000 volunteers in the whole country, or did he specify a state and I just missed it?
a number and then find out I'm off. But we have scores of headquarters in all the toss-up states. We're organized. We're moving. And that's awful hard to replace in the near term. And so, and here's the other thing. I was in the Senate a long time. Very proud of what I've done in the Senate. I was chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee for a long time, and I was chairman or ranking member and chairman of the Judiciary Committee. I'm going to be going down to the Johnson Library. Anyway, I'm going to be going around making the case of the things that I think we have to finish and how we can't afford to lose what we've done or backslide on civil rights, civil liberties, women's rights. There's that little button we have. Control guns, not girls. I mean, the idea we're sitting around this for
he needs more stuff like that. He needs more stuff like that. Control guns, not girls, or something. You need more. I don't know if the gun control issue is going to be like a big one this election, particularly. But you get what I'm saying. More stuff like that.
Sitting around, more children are killed by a bullet than any other cause of death. The United States of America. What the hell are we doing? What are we doing? We got a candidate saying, promised the NRA, don't worry, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to do anything. You got a Supreme Court that is what you might call the most conservative court in American history. This is ridiculous. There's so much we can do still, and I'm determined to get it done. It's about freedom. And by the way, I'll end this. Well, I'm not going to do that. Haley has to come up too. But I remember I made a speech on democracy in Philadelphia at Independence Hall. And I'm not being critical, just observing. The bulk of the press, what the hell is he talking about that for? Democracy. You did. Democracy's not an issue. Democracy's not an issue. Except the polling data showed 60%.
By the way, I don't know about that kid number. I was Googling it quick, and I see some sources on it, but I don't know if it means, like, when he says kids, if he means, like, 0 to 17, or if he means, like, 14 to 17-year-old. Like, I don't know. I remember there was, like, a kernel of truth somewhere to that, but I forget the specific statistics on it. But again, like, I don't know if the main thing Biden needs to be concentrating right now is getting onto, like, well, when I meant kids, I meant the 12 to 15.
of the people knew I was right, thought I was right. I'm not asking you a question. You don't have to answer, obviously. But do you think our democracy is under siege based on this court? Do you think democracy is under siege based on Project 2025? Do you think he means what he says when he says he's going to do away with the civil service, eliminate the Department of Education, make sure, I mean, we've never been here before. And that's the other reason why you say, hand off to another generation. I've got to finish this job. I've got to finish this job because there's so much at stake.
We've had some discussions over the past few days with your press secretary about the question of health exams. And you said you take a cognitive test every day in this job. Are you open to taking another physical or test before the election? Governor Whitmer of Michigan, for instance, said it wouldn't hurt to take a test.
Well, look, two things. One, I've taken 3 significant and intense.
Okay, Biden only has to get through like another 15 minutes, I think, and then he's reached the finish line.
Neurological exams by a neurologist. In each case, as recently as February.
Oh boy.
And they say I'm in good shape, okay? Although I do have a little problem with my left foot because it's not as sensitive because I broke my foot and didn't wear the boot. But I'm good.
His foot, okay.
I'm tested every single day about my neurological capacity to do decisions I make every day. You talk to my staff, all of you talk to my staff. Sometimes my staff talks a lot. But the fact of the matter is, I don't think you have them telling you that all the major ideas we've undertaken haven't been in part initiated by me. I remember when the staff, I said, I'm going to go to South Korea. We're going to get the chip. What are you doing? I'm going to get Japan and Korea back together again after essentially having hostilities toward one another since the end of World War II. I'm going to move and see that we can expand it. You know, the only thing age does is help you with it, creates a little bit of wisdom if you pay attention. And so the point I'm making is, I think it's important that if the neurologist tells me he thinks I need another exam, and by the way, I've laid every bit of the record out. Hadn't hidden a thing. You ought to ask Trump for his, okay? I laid it all out. And every single day I'm surrounded by good docs. If they think there's a problem, I promise you, or even if they don't think it's a problem, they think I should have a neurological exam again, I'll do it. But no one's suggesting that to me now. And I'll ask you another question. No matter what I did, no one's going to be satisfied. Did you have 7 docs? Did you have 2? Who'd you have? Did you do this? How many times did you? So I am not opposed if my doctors tell me I should have another neurological exam, I'll do it. But that's where I am. Haley Bull, Scripps.
Thank you, Mr. President. You said you're making decisions on a day-to-day basis when it comes to support for Ukraine. Does that mean you have not closed the door on further considering lifting restrictions for U.S.-made weapons inside?
Damn, he got hit with the same question twice here. It's really, I don't think any other question. I mean, I guess the only other question that was like that was like fitness for the office and like his age. Huh. Man, it's getting a lot of pressure right now. I mean, it is at the NATO summit after all.
Russia. And if I may, your convention is coming up where your delegates are pledged to make you the official nominee. If they have second thoughts, are they free to vote their conscience?
Obviously, they're free to do whatever they want, but I get overwhelming support. Overwhelming support. I won, I forget how many votes I won in the primary. Overwhelming. And so tomorrow, if all of a sudden I show up at the convention, everybody says, we want somebody else, that's the democratic process. It's not going to happen.
Even if that means
How about the whisper?
for someone else?
I don't like it. Man.
Sure.
I don't know. Maybe it really hits with the boomers and doesn't hit with me, but the whispering.
I'll end this with this. I served in the Senate a long time. I understand the impetus of candidates running for local office and whether they think the top if they can help them or not. In my state of Delaware, which was a very, at least it was a red state when I started, in terms of where you now talk red and blue. I don't recall most of the Democratic presidents winning my state when I was a candidate. The truth of the matter is I understand the self-interest of a candidate. If they think that, running with Biden at the top is going to hurt them, then they're going to run away. I get it. But so far, go and look at the polling data.
Man, you never hear that type of public discussion of like that logic, even though it's like true around elections about like swing district Democrats like distancing themselves with the incumbent depending upon their popularity within the region. Like, it's not usually discussed this openly before. I mean, not before, like ever. It's never been discussed openly. But I mean, like in an environment like this, it's usually not brought up by the president.
In their states. Look at the in-depth, and by the way, I think you'd all acknowledge.
Dylan, your audio is way lower than the video. I hope it's not too bad. I'll check it out.
You're all experts. I'm not being solicitous about the president. You're experts on this stuff.
Do you think it's a bad thing to point out explicitly? No, I just haven't seen it before.
How accurate does anybody think the polls are these days? I can give you a series of polls where you have likely voters, me versus Trump, where I win all the time. when the unlikely voters vote, he wins sometimes. So bottom line is all the polling data right now, which I think is premature because the campaign really hasn't even started. I mean, it hadn't started in earnest yet. Most of the time, it doesn't start till after September, after Labor Day. So a lot can happen. But I think I'm the best I believe I'm the best qualified to govern. And I think I'm the best qualified to win. But there are other people who could beat Trump too. But it's awful start from scratch. And, you know, we talk about, you know, money raised. We're not doing bad. We got about $220 million in the bank. We're doing well. So with that, you have any want to follow up on any of that you just asked me?
Yes. You earlier explained confidence in your vice president.
Yes.
If your team came back and showed you data that she would fare better against former President Donald Trump, would you reconsider your decision to stay in the race?
No, unless they came back and said, there's no way you can win. Me. No one's saying that. No bull.
If you believe that Donald Trump is such an existential threat to democracy, as has been pitched by the Democrats, and that I agree with in many instances, in the majority of like his anti-democratic tendencies, then if there's a chance that Joe Biden can lose, a significant chance, and Kamala has a better chance of winning, like an 80 or 90% chance, while Joe has like a 40 or 50% chance, and we really believe this about the damage that could be done to our institutions, then I mean, the only decision could be switching over to Kamala. But I mean, saying that it's 80 or 90%, like we're just making up numbers. I'm not saying that's the case. I don't think this logic matches up if the stakes are as they are being advertised by Joe and the Democratic Party, and as I think they are. Point is, I don't think this is really defensible, but I think that his argument about like starting from scratch is valid. I don't think it's like an end-all argument, obviously, but it's valid. It's just I don't think the idea that if there's any chance Biden can win, then let's keep Biden. If there's better alternatives that have a much better chance of winning, I disagree with that 100%.
Me. No one's saying that. No poll says that.
I'm gotta stop with the whispering.
This ends tonight's press conference. Thanks, everybody. This concludes.
Respectfully, earlier you misspoke in your opening answer. You referred to Vice President Harris as Vice President Trump. Right now, Donald Trump is using that to mock your age and your memory. How do you combat that criticism from tonight?
Listen to him.
This concludes tonight's press conference. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, everyone.
How do you combat that criticism? Listen to him. So it's the response is like just listen to him and he'll say crazier shit, much crazier shit than misremembering a name. At least that's how I am taking it. Like that's the response. So it's a punchback, which I mean, you know, getting in the mud with Trump strategy. It's witty enough. It's some wit. At least he ended with a witty response. But this is not going to be the thing that's going to be clipped on primetime news. The stuff that's going to get clipped and shipped around is going to be him mixing up Zelensky and Putin's name, and then shortly after mixing up Kamala Harris's and Trump's name. Now, these are things that Trump has done with Nikki Haley and Nancy Pelosi like 5 times in a row, right? So, and even was saying the role that Nikki Haley had in being in charge of Capitol security. He's like called like Kurdish reporters Mr. Kurd. He called the CEO of Apple, Tim Apple. He called the CEO of Lockheed, like Miss Lockheed. I guess he thinks that every business, and I said this earlier, but every business, but from Donald Trump, from his perspective, why wouldn't somebody want to name their business after them? If they could put their name on it, why wouldn't they? So I guess he just assumes it. But those are the things that are going to get clipped. Those are the things that are going to get shared around. This is not the relaunch of Biden's campaign that I think is going to turn around the poll numbers. While I don't think this is complete sinkage. Like, it wasn't a disaster from start to finish. I think he picked up and did better on the later half. I think some answers he was good. There were some answers I disagree with him on policy, obviously, like we talked about with around Ukraine. But this is, I don't think this is going to assuage concerns. I don't think this is going to assuage concerns. I think that all the Democrats are going to be thinking about the clip, about mixing up the names. And as much as you can say, like, oh, well, Donald Trump mixes up the names too, are they going to focus on that? And when people open up the newspaper, is it going to be Donald Trump and Joe Biden mixes up names frequently? Or is it going to be Joe Biden mixes up names frequently? The Republicans are holding fire. They're letting Joe Biden put on this performance for the press. They're letting that fill the airwaves. And he's like doing a little bit of poking, as we can see. He made that post on True Social, but like that's about as much as he's throwing out there. He's letting him fill the airwaves. You think this will have a neutral effect on things? Honestly, if I was a betting man, it would either be a wash at best, or if not a wash, even though Biden was like being asked 2 questions by each reporter. As far as we know, he didn't know the questions in advance. Almost certainly, because there was like certain questions getting asked twice, like the Ukraine one, which makes me think he wasn't getting them in advance. But I mean, I don't think he gave a performance that is going to push the number positively too much. I like the thing that if you watch the whole thing, I think that Biden made some decent policy arguments. And if you're listening to the policy arguments and that's what you're focusing on, and you're listening about like the policy achievements, then maybe this comes away with a decent performance. For example, I remember seeing that like Spanish American voters in like some test groups reacted very like a lot more positively to Biden at the last debate. Maybe it was due to the language barrier of a lot of the people that they were interviewing, and so they just had to read out the policies. I was wondering about this. And when you listen to Donald Trump talk and lie constantly, like that can hurt him too. Like, so there's an area, if he's like constantly hitting Trump on 25, his attacks on democracy, and he's out there and he's able to show that he has at least he's achieved things and he can continue to achieve things, then maybe it can help somewhat. But my fear is that most people did not watch this whole thing. This whole thing was long. It took us like 2.5 hours. Now, of course, probably would have been a lot faster if we didn't add commentary, but that's time. You know, that's time. And I think the main thing that people are going to see are the clips. And are they going to see the policy? Is that going to be what the media talks about? Or is it going to be, Joe Biden mixed up Vladimir Putin and Zelensky? Here's a funny clip about it. And I think odds are that's going to be the main effect of this. So either a wash, or I think it's going to be negative generally. The only other way I think it could be positive is if you watch the whole thing and completely like gave Biden the benefit of the doubt and just listened for policy. So while I don't think that voter doesn't exist, I just don't think that the press is going to be thinking about that voter when talking about this. And you know what? Biden has more campaign events very in the near future. He's going to be speaking more. He's going to be in public, and decisions on whether he's going to be the nominee have to be made probably within this month. Because the longer they put it off, the more impossible it's going to be to switch. So these are the public performances which Democrats are going to be determining whether they continue to back Biden or they jump out from behind Biden. I think the thing that definitely concerned me the most was hearing the UAW questioning their endorsement of Joe Biden. That concerned me. Definitely when you compare Joe Biden's NLRB to Donald Trump's. I doubt they'll pull the trigger on withdrawing support, but I think it might be indicative of the fact that they just want the strongest candidate, and if they think that could be Kamala Harris, they just don't want Donald Trump's NLRB back, which was absolutely terrible for labor. I don't think this is going to assuage the concerns of those people. Howdy do, missed most of this. Thank you, Pondering Politics. Thank you for the $10. So let me start with the good news. The good news is that Biden did talk about some positive policy. He did give some pretty in-depth answers to like Israel-Palestine questions. And like if you're policy centered, there is some good stuff in here if you're just sitting down and you're acting like an informed voter and taking notes. But when it comes to clips and when it comes to assuaging concerns about his age, I do not think this will assuage concerns about his age, even though he would have to have good performance moving forward, period, considering how big of an issue this has become. But I think that certain clips that Joe Biden provided tonight are going to make Apple fodder. Joe Biden before this press conference mixing up Zelensky's name and introducing him as Putin, which I heard from, I think, one reporter. He was talking about a DNC colleague he was talking to, and they said, my God, what a fantastic intro. It'd be like an American politician introducing Winston Churchill and saying, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Hitler. And it's not a good look. And then the Vice President, Kamala Harris, mix up with Donald Trump at the opening line. That's the thing that got me. It was for the Zelensky slip up, it was the closing line, and for the interview for the presser, it was the opening line that he had the biggest fumbles. Not good places to have fumbles.
Missed most of this.
Oh, well, I already answered that. Thank you for the $10. Again, there was some good policy stuff here. I don't think he assuaged concerns about his age. I think he had some good quips about Joe Biden. There's some clips that the Democrats can put up in response, like little Hamlet barriers of like, oh, here's a quip Joe Biden did. But I think best case scenario, it's a wash, with maybe certain subsections of the vote that Joe Biden wants to appeal to being appealed to policy-wise. And that's best pitch on it.
You're a savage imperialist who has cultivated a far-right audience.
Thank you for the $5. I appreciate it. Thank you for the lovely message.